Rev up your engines!
Mo says, Scotty, what's a good, cheap, used 8-seater family car? Good and cheap do not go together, especially with used. That's like the worst triumvirate possible. And an 8-seater, everybody and their brother wants an 8-seater. My advice would be, if you can find any older Toyotas that have 8 seats, buy them because they can last forever. If you're a riverboat gambler, you could get like a used Ford Expedition, and they can last quite some time. But those and the modern Suburbans, they're extremely high tech. And as they age, they cost a fortune to fix. It's not like the olden days where you could buy a Ford or a Chevy Suburban and drive it for 300,000 miles. No, they're all high-tech and they cost a fortune to fix. So I myself am leery about that. But you can find those cheaper. If you could find one in your area that doesn't have too many miles on it. I'd go for a Toyota product myself. They last the longest. But you're never going to find a cheap, good one because it doesn't exist. Prices are high. Everybody's looking for an 8-seater. And I can understand why you're going used, though, because the new ones are insane. Even the Ford and GM 8-seaters, those things are going for like $60,000 to $90,000 and up. I don't blame you looking for a used one. But good, cheap, used, nah, that doesn't go together. Not today. Demi says, Scotty, what's the cheapest luxury car you can get? My wife's Lexus. I paid $3,000 for a Lexus that had 65,000 miles on it. We're still driving it 10 years later. It runs like a clock. You try to find it from somebody. It happened to be that one of my customers' fathers died of a heart attack. They had cars. They never had kids. He had a Mercedes. His wife had a Lexus SUV, so they didn't want another car. So they sold it to me cheap. It did need some paint work, but I mean, I only spent $1,000 on it to get it look new, so. But you gotta go used, and Lexuses are so well made. If you can find a good one, that's what you want to look for. Victor Hussey says, why don't you cover diesel trucks? I've made some videos with diesel trucks. Most of my customers don't have diesel trucks. Diesel trucks in the United States are mainly commercial vehicles. They cost a ton to repair. They cost a ton to buy. The good ones are almost all over $100,000 now if you get a bed and everything and you're using it for a commercial work truck. So the parts cost a lot. The guys who work on them can charge upwards of $200 an hour labor. So I don't work on all that many. But when I do get one, somebody brings one. I did the one on that diesel Colorado that the guy had a little trailer and I was rather impressed. It was basically, though, a Mitsubishi diesel engine in it. And they've been making engines for a long time. And they're good diesels. Josh Pittenger says, looking to buy a 2002 to 2004 Buick LeSabre. What's your honest opinion? I'm not a GM fan, but a 2002 Buick LeSabre is not a bad car. Most of them had those 3800 V6 engines that could run forever. The weak point is the automatic transmissions. But by 2002, they learned a little bit about front-wheel drive transmissions. If you're thinking about buying one, you gotta find a guy like me to check it out with this fancy scan tool and say, yes, the transmission is in good shape, or no, it's going out. And they can't hide that information from a good mechanic because we can look at the data for how many milliseconds do the upshifts and downshifts miss? What kind of problems, if any, does it have in any particular shift? 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. All that information's on these computers, boy, and we mechanics that know how to use them, we can tell you if it's a junk or not within 1 hour. Don't buy it sight unseen by a mechanic, though. That's a mistake. James Carroll says, hi, from Kentucky. Scotty, I have a mysterious coolant leak in a 2007 Lexus RS 350. Any idea? You're losing coolant, right. Now, are you leaking coolant? Or is it burning coolant? Of course, if it's leaking coolant, it's going to be dripping somewhere. What I advise you to do is you can get some UV, ultraviolet coolant leak detector. You put an ounce of it in your radiator. Drive it around a day. Then when you come back, you get cool yellow sunglasses and a UV light. You can get the stuff on eBay, Amazon for $20, $30, right? Then you can see if there's any glow coming out, that's where the leak is. Look by the water pump, it could be dripping a little bit. But like I say, you're always going to see drips if it's leaking. But if you're losing coolant and it isn't dripping, that means it's burning coolant, which would mean your head gasket is probably going out. And I have a video, how to tell if your head gasket is blown. Type that on YouTube, watch my video, and you can see if the head gasket's blown. Pray it's leaking somewhere, and you can find it yourself with that UV leak detector. It works perfectly fine. It will find any leak. The only leak you're not going to see is, let's say your heater core is leaking. That's inside the dash. You won't see it under the dash. But it will then leak into the AC drain pan because they share a common area. Where your drain hose is for the AC, where the water drips when you're running your AC, the coolant would leak with a dye, and when you shined the UV light there in that tube, it would be glowing because it would show you the heater core is leaking. You can't beat dye because people can see something, they can comprehend it. That's why a lot of people have problems fixing and understanding electrical problems in a car because they can't see. You can't see electricity. You got to use gauges and measure and understand how it works. With a dye Anybody can see it. You just need to dye, yellow sunglasses, and a UV light. Mr. Ennis said, my 05 Acura left ABS sensor wire snapped. Can I tape it back together? I got the transmission to stop leaking as well. You don't tape it back together. What you do is you cut it to where you got good wires on each end. Then you splice wires in. You twist the ends on and you solder them together. Now, before you solder them together, a lot of people forget, you get that shrink tubing on the wire, twist them together, and then solder them. You slide it over. You can't slide it over once you soldered it because then it's all one piece, right? Well, you slide it over and then you get a hair dryer and match and it melts it on so you don't get any interruption. You can't tape them together because those ABS modules work on milliamps. That's thousands of an amp, hardly any power. The wire has to be connected. You can't tape it together. It has to be soldered and then sealed because it needs a perfect connection or it won't work at all. And a little soldering gun, you get one that's made for wires. Those cheap little ones that are $10 work perfectly fine. You don't need an expensive one. James says, what is your thoughts on Marvel Mystery Oil? Or for those of you who don't know, Marvel Mystery Oil is one of the best penetrating oils in the world. You got an engine, say it's old, sat a long time and it locked up. You fill the cylinders with it after you take the spark plugs, let it soak for a week, and then get a cheater bar and try turning the engine. A lot of times it will break loose if the piston rings have rusted in. It's amazing stuff. It's also a decent cleaner. Back in the day we liked it, but today you can't really use it for that because back in the day they didn't have catalytic converters on cars. So if we wanted to clean the engine out, we just rev the engine up, race the carburetor, pour mystery oil into the carburetor. It would burn it in the engine. It would clean it all up, but it would clog up your catalytic converter and ruin your oxygen sensors today. So you can't do that on modern day cars. But it still is one of the best penetrating oils out there. BoWelf60 says, Scotty, what are your thoughts on buying a 1993 Honda Civic Del Sol with only 120,000 miles on it? Del Sols were fine cars. They were basically a little bit fancier Civic, right? Different body style. They never really flew because they were kind of in no man's land. The Accords and the Preludes were much nicer, and the Civics cost less, so they were never all that popular. But they can run forever. The thing is, it's 1993, so you're talking about a 28-year-old car. That's an old car, and it doesn't matter who makes them. You're generally going to have some kind of problems. Now, you said it's got 120,000 miles. If they say that's real, if they could actually prove it. But, you know, guys can change speedometers from junkyards. That's a nothing thing. So unless they had absolute proof, I wouldn't pay much because of the age and the mileage. But if it really had 120,000 miles, I mean, I've seen those things with 300,000-400,000 miles on them. Just realize it's that old. Rubber seals are going to break, and you might say, oh, they're just rubber seals. Okay, say the rubber rear main oil seal goes on the engine, it leaks oil, you got to pull the transmission off or pull the engine to replace it. So that's a lot of money. You got to realize that. Lucifer says, hey, I got a 76 Olds 350 Rocket. What's your knowledge? They were good engines. No, compared to today, they're nothing. They got 4-cylinder engines now that put out more than those old V8s, and they're gas hogs, of course. But they were solid built, and they could run an awful long time. And let's say you did a lot of highway driving. I had a friend that had one, and sometimes he'd get like 19 miles a gallon going 65 miles an hour, and that's okay for a huge heavy steel vehicle like that with the big V8 engine. And being, you know, a GM design 350, you can get parts for those things. It's not like you're going to buy an old car and you can't get parts for it anymore. Parts are still readily available for those things. It's not that hard. Fun Florida Fishing with the Local says, what are your thoughts on the first generation Dodges? I got a 91 Dodge D150. Well, you follow me, and I'm not a big Dodge fan, but back in the day, yes, they made much better vehicles. My grandson recently bought one and sold it and flipped it. He was happy with it. The person who bought it was happy to get a lower priced vehicle that was in good shape. They were solid made in those days. The V8 engines were strong. They didn't have the crappy transmissions that they put them in later, and they weren't owned by Chrysler and now Peugeot, the Stellantis. As long as it's not rusted, check the frame and the body. Make sure it's not rotting, because if the frame's all rotted, it's worth nothing. Don't put money into it, because then you're just putting money into them. Endless money pit. When the frame cracks, you throw it away. But if the frame is still solid, they made them good. And if it's not from like Chicago or Detroit or Buffalo with all the salt in the winter, it might not be rust. Superficial rust doesn't mean anything. Get a hammer and hit it. If it goes clang, 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 that's good. But if it goes crunch, 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 and it moves in and pieces fall off, no. You don't want to put money into that. Nearjust says, Scotty, what are your thoughts on improving poor OEM LED headlights on Kia Seltos? Oh, that's real easy. There are so many different LEDs out there. You can try out a million of them. Now, be careful not to break the law, because there are places that only allow them so bright, and if it's brighter than that, the cops can come out with a machine and say they're too bright and give you a ticket. But they come in various brightnesses, so you can pick whatever you want and they put in the brightness you want. There are even some, like I have, this guy in Puerto Rico makes them, and they have 4 levels of brightness. brightness. And it's all by turning your headlight switch. You turn it on once, they're super bright. Then you quick turn it off and on, then it's less bright. Then you quick turn it off and on again, it's even less bright. Then you quick turn it off and on again, and it's yellow for snow. And then, if you turn it off the last time, it's flashing yellow to be a warning, like if there's a tornado coming or a forest fire and you don't care that you're breaking a law because you're not supposed to have flashing yellow lights, people will warn you and you'll be warning people and they'll see you. So there's lots of stuff you can just buy and put in. LED stuff, there's such a choice these days. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.